Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Wicklum, and welcome to the inaugural Owl's Nest podcast. Funny thing happened as we recorded it. The back and forth conversation was flowing. Our guests, Jay Davis and Hugo Fuentes, as well as myself, were enjoying ourselves, and before we noticed, we'd gone twice as long as intended. So, being the greedy content monger that I am, I made the call to cut the recording in half and create two podcasts. Some may call it opportunistic. I call it, well, opportunistic, I guess, but so be it. So in the first half of the podcast, Jay, Hugo, and myself discuss, amongst other things, virtual leadership, scenario planning, and the perception of supply chains in the media and within executive boardrooms. A big welcome to our guests for the inaugural Owl's Nest podcast, Jay Davis and Hugo Fuentes. Jay Davis is a supply chain executive with over 25 years of operations and manufacturing management background, and he's previously held strategically integral positions at Canada Post, Volvo, and Hammond Power Solutions. Hugo Fuentes is the CEO of the Owl Solutions, a supply chain data analytics company based in Waterloo, Ontario. Hugo has over 20 years of experience building and leading supply chain organizations in multiple geographies and industries. And he has held senior management positions at Factors Group of Companies and Fitting Caterpillar. Gentlemen, thank you for being here for the podcast, and I hope you will have as much fun as I will have, and I hope we can soak up some supply chain and operational expertise.
Great. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan.
So let's step right in, and we'll go into the first question. As former operations executives, tell me what you think is happening in virtual boardrooms right now. We'll start with Jay, and then Hugo, you can chime in after that.
Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that. Really appreciate joining you today. I think these topics are very relevant in our environment right now. And in the boardroom right now, I think it's really tough. There are a lot of moving parts right now, and the leaders need to figure out how to balance them all together. They need to protect the employees, customers, and cash flow right now. Then they need to figure out how to achieve their year-end goals because they can't give up on those. And then after that, they need to assess if there will be a new normal for them and how does that affect the 3 to 5 year objectives. For some companies, that boardroom is okay. They've got strong operational protocols in place. So managing the fires is easy. It's like firefighters. Everyone has a role and they know what they need to do. These leaders or companies also have well-defined strategies that they review on a quarterly or biannual basis. So for these companies, the virtual aspect of the boardroom is not that complicated because they don't need to be face-to-face and have long, drawn-out conversations on how to manage the fires or pivot to a significant event. However, for some executives who don't rely on their teams to put out the fires, or for executives who have not spent the time transferring the 30 years of tribal knowledge they have in their head to the rest of the organization, these executives are running hard and fast. And they will only survive because they have a tremendous amount of energy, or they won't survive. They'll run out of steam personally and professionally. So to summarize, some boardroom leaders are running at a good pace because they have good operational strategic leadership skills, and some are just running without direction and without a team behind them. So for them right now, it's a tough spot to be in.
Interesting. Okay, Hugo, if you would like to chime in, that'd be fantastic.
No, definitely. I think supply chain is definitely a hot topic right now. And when I think about the virtual boardrooms, I think that, people even in the streets now is talking about supply chains, not only the executive boardrooms, right? So supply chain has become a word that people, when they think about why they go to the Walmarts or the retailers out there and they don't find toilet paper, right? So now the supply chain word is becoming more and more popular. But I think particularly supply chain people and successful CEOs are always looking for continuous improvement opportunities. So I think that in those boardrooms, I think they try to find ways to do better, and a couple of key reflections that I guess that people is discussing in those boardrooms is, number one, what did we miss? So what haven't we done effectively to prepare our business for a stress test like this, right? So there's definitely no supply chain that's 100% bulletproof. However, the level of disruption that we have seen, is dramatic in some cases. So I think people working in the supply chain frontline has done a tremendous job at helping us go through this crisis, which perhaps is also masking some of the, even more scary fragilities out there. So I think, discussions that are happening are, things around what are the key aspects that we need to rethink, redesign, and reinforce moving forward. So this is not over, right? So we gotta act now. So what do we do about it? I think questions like that. So what is the 30, 60, and 90-day plan? And even longer. So what are the capabilities that we need to address moving forward? I think those are the discussions that are happening as we speak. And I think it will continue for some time.
And,
Interesting.
and if I
Go
could
ahead, Jay.
make a comment on that, the questions, what do we do better? What do we miss? I think those are the key questions that need to be talked about in the boardroom. But I think depending on the leadership skills, sometimes those boardrooms aren't even getting to those questions because they're fighting the fires. So in a boardroom like that, they should be talking about these questions, but if they don't have good operational protocols to manage the fires and get through the day, the week, the month, then they're spending more time on that than they should be on asking about what did we miss, how do we do better. So I think exactly that those are the questions that should be asked. It's just some companies, their leaders are in, I'll say, a little bit better shape to ask those questions and discuss them.
100%. So the next question I have, and this kind of ties in from the first one, is how has virtual leadership changed in the past, 1, 2, or 3 months? And Hugo, I'll have you start. And you mentioned um, about the personal toll that's being taken. If you can kind of comment on virtual leadership and how it's changed, that'd be great.
I think that's a great question because I think that this virtual reality, working from home reality, is pretty much a new experience for maybe, I don't know, 90% of the people out there. So for me, at least, it's hard to imagine, remote leadership, right? So for me, operational leadership, particularly, is all about talking to people, to walking the warehouse floor, so learning from the staff what's going on, their concerns, what are they seeing. So therefore, it is super hard to get that perception when you're sitting in front of a computer. So this is why I think that getting creative in terms of exploring different ways to communicate with people is key. I don't know if Zoom or any other online conferencing tool today is being utilized to connect executives with frontline workers. That could be great, right? So but I'm not sure. I hope so because I think executing that operational leadership sitting in a computer and not being leading the teams in the front line is hard. I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of leaders out there that are doing their best and try to go to the facilities, keep people engaged and motivated. I think, but it's still hard. I mean, I think we need to accommodate to this new reality, and I think that's also creating a sort of a shock in the supply chain in general. So this reality of people moving from working and in an office to remotely 90% of their time, that's definitely a challenge.
All right, Jay, you want to comment as well?
Yeah, I like your perspective, Hugo, on the option to connect the virtual tools to the actually frontline and floor. And I think we can do more of that for sure. And it's probably not been really it hasn't been leveraged that well, like the other virtual tools about connecting meetings and connecting people face to face. So I do like that perspective for sure. I think the definition of good virtual leadership, though, will remain the same. And I say this because I was thrown into a virtual leadership role about 10 years ago, and I've been in a virtual leadership type role for at least 10 years. And when I worked abroad in Europe, my team was located in the Americas, Asia, and Europe. I had to sink or swim. And that is where I was trained on how to manage meetings and teams virtually more effectively. And there are a lot of leaders who have been in this boat and have that skill set. However, I believe what has changed is the value of good virtual leadership skills has come to the forefront because, as in every case, there are people that do it well and want it because they see it as a great way forward, and there are ones that don't. The problem is for the people that don't love it, it's not only just accepted now, it's going to be expected by our employees. Employees aren't going to tolerate leaders who are not flexible with working from home, working at the cottage, or wherever they want to be. Because it's been proved out to a certain extent in some roles that they can be mobile, they can be at home, they can be wherever they need to be. They don't have to be in the office to do a great job. So they'll put pressure on these leaders into demanding a flexible mobile situation because the technology has been proved out in roles and industries where it once thought impossible. So I don't know if good virtual leadership styles have changed or will change that much in the future, but will change. But what will change, I think, for sure, is the expectation from employees that their leaders must have good leadership skills if they're going to recruit and retain and develop the best employees the market has to offer.
And I like that, Jay. I like the fact that you discussed the virtual hard skills are one thing, but the virtual soft skills are definitely something that needs to be focused on as well.
And
It's different. It's an interesting transition that's gone on.
and I think that Jay brings a very good perspective to the table, which is, what's next, right? Because I think definitely the world is evolving, and we're gonna face a situation in the future where a lot of companies are gonna rethink about, should I have, my people working, back to the office, and I do. I mean, 100% of them back to the office, or can I remain operating with, more effectiveness, with keeping, a certain percentage of that workforce working remotely. I mean, so the world is evolving and things are going to change. Definitely, leadership have to adapt to a new reality, and that's, part of the challenge that we're gonna live moving forward. But I think it's a good challenge because I think the world is evolving.
And I think the companies that will succeed won't be the companies that say, "Oh, um, we'll allow virtual management because um, it didn't have a negative impact." The companies that will succeed, I believe, will say, "No, we want to have more virtual management or mobile management because we see faster decisions being made. We see that we can lower our cost and fixed costs as far as offices. No, we see an advantage in having virtual leadership and mobile management. We see an advantage. And those are the companies that I think will do well. And there are so many companies that have already done this. So this is nothing new. Um, but I think it's something that going forward, some companies will struggle with a little bit, and some
Yeah,
companies will learn.
I think that's a good point, Jay. And just to kind of tack on to your example of um, the actual brick and mortar offices, I think that employees have been pushed together and kind of they sit together and they group together at offices, and there's no way that they can do that with a 6 foot radius necessary for clearance for distance. So I think that companies need to really re-examine the idea of having employees crammed together in big rooms with cubicles, etc. In this situation. So they're going to have to look at a paradigm shift and maybe embrace work from home policies.
Yeah, and I think they need to kind of do it from a gradual perspective. I was talking with a network of HR people not too long ago, and I think putting a blanket policy, a company policy on whether or not they work from home or not work from home is maybe not the best decision because some people thrive in a work from home type situation where they feel more comfortable with a private setting, and some employees don't. Some employees need that extroverted type environment and that energy, and they thrive differently. So I think some companies will have to take a look at it role by role and individually, and they don't need to necessarily make this decision immediately, really quickly, but they need to kind of look at it if they want to recruit, retain, and develop the best employees.
Absolutely. Jay, do you think that this pandemic has improved demand planning? And a kind of a side question, give me an approximation as to what percentage of companies you think will be ready for a second wave of COVID.
That's not easy. So I most definitely believe it will. But specifically, I would say it will impact scenario planning. Lots of companies have plans, but not a lot have planned out different scenarios. The good companies will establish protocols for 2 to 3 plans and have them ready to execute if need be. This takes more time to develop and requires leaders to not only be patient, but they need to allow for innovative ideas to come up and be tested. Now, if the culture does not allow for this type of activity, then it's unlikely that this pandemic will improve their planning and scenario planning. But if the company culture or leaders do value, outside the box thinking and options, then it'll be easier for them to move towards scenario planning where they think through different scenarios, either related to a devastating second wave that is worse than the first wave, or a complete recovery, an abrupt stop, or the scenarios in between. So I think, yes, planning will improve, and I think the focus would be more on scenario planning. Plan for the extremes, and then plan for something in the middle, or a couple of options in the middle, and not just plan, but think through the execution so that the next time that this happens, they're going to be ready. We've had significant events before, 9/11, significant, horrible event. COVID-19, significant, horrible event. A lot of companies are surviving because they've got scenarios. The tsunami in Japan. I remember being with Volvo, and we had to respond in Asia with our suppliers and OEMs in Asia. So these significant events will happen, and some companies will just have to focus a little bit more on scenario planning.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And thinking on 3 levels: optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic. It definitely helps out with that kind of planning. Hugo, please contribute.
No, for sure. I mean, I like Jade's comments because of 2 things. Number one, he mentioned the scenario planning. I think that's a key concept that's going to play out significantly. And number two, because he is very optimistic, and I like that. Uh, I think from my perspective, I think that is this pandemic improving or will improve planning? I think it's still too early to say from our perspective. I think that the crisis has unfolded, in how reactive our processes and systems in general are. I don't think that there's a lot of companies out there using leading indicators that allow planning to be proactive. So I don't see a lot of companies doing scenario planning, as as Jay mentioned, is critical for companies to be better prepared. I think simulating things like what is my supply chain response under different scenarios. Perhaps it's a lack of tools, but everything starts, from my perspective, at a strategic levels. I mean, is this something important for C-level executives to consider? I think a lot more has to be done in this particular point. Personally, I feel like most of the companies heavily impacted by COVID-19 disruption are at the moment trying to just stay afloat, which is natural, right? And should be a priority number one. However, I don't have a huge level of confidence about how strongly are they prepared to confront, future waves, moving forward. But I think the key concept, as Jay mentioned, is scenario planning. I think this is an activity that I think has been, I would say, underappreciated in the past by executives. I mean, I think for whatever reason, because sometimes we're human beings that we react when situations happen, and we're not necessarily looking forward to potential risks. And but for whatever reason, I think the value of scenario planning is critical. And I think every single tool or new process that companies can deploy around that strategy, I think is fundamentally important for the future.
Yeah, just to build off that, I think I agree with you, Hugo. There's a lot of companies that are just not there yet, and I've seen some companies that get there because it's a new, um, it's new to them, and they're introduced to it, and they say, "Oh, this is kind of cool." And then I see some companies that do it because they've got a very strong handle on their operational performance, meaning that in the boardroom, the executives don't have to spend any time talking about whether or not they met the day, the week, or the month, because it's like clockwork. Toyota production system, Volvo production system, companies that have operating systems that are well known, those systems manage those fires. Yes, occasionally an executive is going to have to step in, but in some companies, executives are stepping in 80, 90% of the time or 60% of the time. And so they don't have the time to spend on scenario planning, or they don't have the time to spend with their team on scenario planning because they're really fighting the fires. So I think certainly companies have benefited from having a strong operating system to fight those fires and allowing the executives to spend more time and the teams to spend more time on strategic planning and a little bit of scenario planning.
Definitely,
Excellent
that's a
point.
very good point. Yep.
So, Hugo, I know that you are a supply chain evangelist. So I'll start off with you with this question. The word supply chain has been uttered in the media more in the last 2 months than at any time previously. So we know where public perception lies. How do you think supply chains are being perceived within the executive ranks internally?
I think, as I mentioned before, I think supply chain, and you're right, supply chain is a word that has been in the media in the last 2 months, pretty much high in the ranks, and I think top of mind for people has changed quite importantly, in the last few months. As a matter of fact, I think over the last weeks, I've been approached by several people asking my opinion about supply chain outlook, risk mitigation, what should they do, things like that. This immediately tells you that the perception about supply chain as a function that can make or break a company I think is growing. So I believe what is happening will definitely accelerate companies' needs to upgrade their supply chains within the internal ranks. I always think about, that's my personal approach. I always think about people, process, and technology when you think about how you build your supply chain capabilities, right? So, and I think those are the foundations of any significant organization. And I think companies have to think about that. I think, how is my supply chain set up at the moment in those three aspects? So people, process, and technology. And I think that discussion is moving up in the priority in many organizations, and and it definitely increasing the perception of the importance in the executive ranks internally in any organization at the moment.
All right, Jay, you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I think Hugo's exactly right. The discussions are significant. And again, I think it's kind of two camps. Some companies have partners as suppliers, meaning they develop each other operationally and have long term strategic alignment. So for them, their supply base will not change very much. We have significant events that happen to us, and the suppliers, along with the OEM, have thought through these events and have good performance and have good trust. However, in some cases, that partnership does not exist. I mean, it could be because of past performance issues, or it could be related to cultural differences associated with communication styles, or simply just intolerances. Now, if the latter exists, it'll be easy for the companies to use this as a means to say, dump the supplier and find an alternative. And this will open up doors to suppliers who were not considered before, either because of higher costs or lower delivery precision. So, good news for North America. But if the issue that drove the OEM to go offshore in the first place is not overcome, either the OEM will lose market share because their costs rise, and or they will eventually go back to an old supplier while at the same time build in stronger scenario planning to offset the risks of the supply chain being interrupted again. So I think these are the types of discussions going on right now. Do we have the right balance of North American and offshore manufacturing right now? How should we assess the health of our supply chain? And are there any new opportunities we should look at from a supply chain perspective, whether it be an old supplier in North America who's been able to reduce costs recently in the last few years, or a new supplier in offshore who has lost some capacity due to other companies pulling out, and now they have more capacity for you. So it can go either way. So either way, companies are probably feeling very comfortable in how the suppliers are selected. And I think that's the focus. Companies need to assess the process and how the suppliers are selected, how are they developed, and how are they rewarded. And if they do that, then I think they can come out of this with confidence to say that their supply chain will be able to overcome any new events or anything coming forward in the future.
Jay, that's a great point. I think the aspect of deglobalization and relocalization is one that definitely needs to be addressed, at least in conversation and potentially in action, when it comes to the leadership of companies, and making that decision is very difficult because you are talking about sometimes decades long relationships that need to be at least evaluated and potentially addressed in a relevant, tangible way.
Yeah, I really truly believe there's going to be opportunities for suppliers on both sides. There's going to be an opportunity for suppliers in North America to gain more capacity based on what happened. And there's going to be opportunities on offshore as well. Whether it be in Asia, South America, or Central America, there will be opportunities on both sides, but it will come down to a company having a very solid, good way to select. Their selection criteria needs to be strong, it needs to be broad, and needs to be strong. They also need to realize that they're developing the suppliers, and the suppliers also are developing them. It's a two-way street, and they got to make sure they reward each other in a fair manner. And those are the ones that where companies are looking more at long-term partnerships, and they'll survive.
That stuff was so good, I almost hate to cut it short. It will be hard to top, but the second half of the conversation might just do that. In the next podcast, our guests Jay Davis and Hugo Fuentes will talk data strategy and performance indicators, including why KPIs need to align with other company indicators. We hope you tune in, and thanks for being part of the Owl's Nest.